Okay, everybody. So welcome. We're in for a treat. I would like to introduce Dr. Sharon Coen, who comes to us from Salford University, also teaches in a media psychology program. Sharon has been quite prolific in the area of media psychology, and with many articles, and recently published this great book, which I want to plug because I do have a copy, The Psychology of Journalism, which is something that she's been interested in for a while. And I also want to say that Sharon is a friend of Fielding. She has actually been, Vicki, we were talking about our in-person sessions. Sharon has visited Fielding, has co-taught courses at our in-person sessions in Santa Barbara. She's a great friend. We have also visited her. Some of our students have gone. We've co-taught together with our students and her students. So Sharon, turn it over to you. It is a pleasure again to see you here, my friend. Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me to be here, and absolutely, I'm number one fan, if you can say that, of Fielding. I'm very happy that I met Regina to begin with, and everyone when I went over. We met on Twitter among all the places. So it was I think one of the best experiences when it came to learn how to think and what to think. And I'm only grateful that I have the chance to speak to you about my work. And actually, I designed a very short talk because I want to squeeze your brains and I want our interaction and discussion to be the main part. So now I'm gonna try, because we use a different system, so I can't figure out.
You have to share screen.
Advanced shared options in share screen, and then one participant. No, that's not what I want to do.
It's a green. It should be a green button at the bottom.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It says if I can. Oh, now it woke up. Okay, now I can do it. Now you should be able to see this screen. Can you? Yes, brilliant. So that's what I'm gonna tell. You're gonna see me looking there because that's where the presentation is. I'm sorry, I use multiple screens. But the title of what I want to talk about today is how to take a media psychological approach to understanding journalism. But as I said, because my preoccupation at the moment is particularly on the role of news in democracy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and summarize what I've learned by editing the book and how that informed a model of learning from the news that I developed and wrote about in a book about the psychology of democracy. At the end, I'm going to hopefully be able to present you with a visual summary of the model that I'm thinking about. And we can have fun thinking about how that would work, how we can test it systematically, whether there are some connections of factors that I haven't thought of, etc., etc. So this is the plan. But I'll take you to a brief journey to begin with to explain why, why on earth did I get involved in studying the psychology of journalism? Why is news so important to me? And why do I think we should all study it? And it should be at the heart of what we do. I came trained in social cognition, but I ended up working in collaboration with scholars in the media and communication area. And what we did was a series of studies, cross-country studies with a number of different countries, in which we were looking at the content of news on the one hand, and the knowledge. So the knowledge of participants, knowledge and other psychological factors, because year on year I managed to squeeze in another psychological variable in the study, but in representative samples of the various populations in the countries that we were considering. And what we found was that consistently we could find a small but significant effect of news on increased level of knowledge, increased levels of political self-efficacy, which we defined, knowledge we defined as awareness of current affairs as measured by recognition tasks that we designed based on what the media coverage at the time was about. Political self-efficacy was defined as the feeling that you have enough competence and ability to make a difference via voting, and interest in politics. And what we found was that year on year, there was a significant, small, but significant relationship between we use the word consumption because it's very popular in the media and communication field. I'm not quite sure I like it. I would like to come up with an alternative term, but let's use consumption for now. So news consumption was related positively with both increased level of knowledge and increased levels of political self-efficacy, and ultimately with also increased level of interest in politics. So in the final paper, we developed a model in which we argued that media could be conceptualized as part of a virtuous cycle, which helps getting citizens better aware, feeling, more engaged, more able to make a difference, etc., etc. So that was the key idea. And what we found was also that when it came to political self-efficacy, media were increased levels of news consumption corresponded with a reduction of the gap in education. So they seem to be particularly helpful for people that didn't have the level of education that, would allow, or what we call what in sociology is called the cultural and social capital, to be able to acquire the knowledge, the efficacy, etc., in other ways. So I thought, this is brilliant. This is something that we really need to better work on and understand. But we also found that media wasn't able to close the gender gap. The gender gap remained strong and stable across all the countries, all the studies, all level of use, etc., etc. So then I started wondering, I'm like, okay, we're missing something. There is something wrong. If we cannot understand this, then we're not serving the citizenry, we are serving a part, half of them, which is okay, but we need to serve also the other part. So that's where I was coming from. That's why I thought news was important. It has a democratic value, and I need to understand journalism better in order to understand what is going on. And that was the idea behind the book that I decided to edit. on the psychology of journalism, because I was thinking, if I understand better the whole process, maybe I can also learn how to better explain what is going on and why it works in certain cases and it doesn't work in others, etc., etc. Obviously, like in many, well, almost all the works, there is a particular angle offered in that book, and I kind of come to the psychology of journalism with a media psychological perspective, obviously, but also with the idea, a particular angle, that is the idea that news are not just empty content, and they're not just something that we consume, which is why I don't like the term consumer. There is a process of co-construction. And this process of co-construction happens with the interaction of different subjectivities that all contribute to what we end up with, that is the phenomenon of news and journalism. So my tenet was that we're all humans. An editor is a human, a journalist is a human, a reader is a human. Psychology looks at humans. So what if we start stripping back everything and looking at the basic processes, the basic psychological processes that we know after decades of study that affect human functioning? And what if we postulate that these processes will affect not only the way in which a user or reader or whatever, I call them citizens because we all are, so that's my favorite word, a citizen uses, has when they're consuming news, but also when a journalist selects the relevant news, when the editor shapes or decides the collocation of a particular news, when the owner sends directives about how to organize their newspaper, every stakeholder we have in the process of news production is human. And whether they like it or not, whether they like to pretend that doesn't affect them and they are perfectly objective and stuff like that, we know that's not true. We know that isn't the case. So that's the main contribution that psychology can bring, is awareness for all the stakeholders of their own role in shaping and interpreting and giving a particular interpretation to the content of news. And obviously, another important starting point for that work was that, like most things, it doesn't operate only at one level. And I quote here Cantrell and Allport, who are like my go-to scholars in media psychology as far as I'm concerned. And they talk about three different levels. They talk about the level of the organization, the structure and regulation of the medium as the biggest level, and which, as far as I'm concerned, is well captured by the literature in media and communication about media systems, for example. Then there is the medium level, so it's affordances, the characteristics of the medium that also kind of are important in determining the subjective experience. And we know Cantrell and Allport did fantastic work on the affordances of radio and how that impacted impression formation. They report on 11 or 12 studies in their book on the psychology of radio on impression formation, simply based on the affordance of radio. And then we have what they call the taste and habits dimension, which is why are we approaching the particular medium? What uses do we make? And I feel that is the most comparable to the uses and gratification perspective. So bearing these kind of starting points in mind, I turned to, well, I went back to my original love, that is making a difference in society and understanding the role that as a psychologist I could play in helping developing a more democratic society. So my question was, okay, I've learned a lot from that book on you know, the various processes, how psychology can help with that, etc., etc. Now, what does he say about democracy? What can we say about that? And with my PhD student, we wrote a chapter in which we started from a series of assumptions that I'm more than happy for you to challenge if you feel like it. But the assumption number one is the assumption that informed citizenship is essential for a healthy democracy. And that is rooted in work, for example, by Coen, but a long tradition in media and in political sciences that argues that we need informed citizens for democracy to work the way we conceive it as working. The second thing, because this chapter, chapter was dedicated in particular to online news consumption. So the second assumption is that the internet is a getaway to news consumption. So that, and I will justify that later, but it's an assumption in a way. And the final assumption, that was something that I learned from the book, is the basic psychological principles can drive our understanding of news and journalism as a phenomenon and their role in democracy. So, okay, so this happened in the context of a report I was writing in 2020, this chapter. So it happened in the context of a report from Ofcom arguing that the vast majority, not vast, but a significant majority of people would access news online at the time. You can imagine with COVID and the aftermath of COVID, I would expect this to have become even higher as a percentage, and the internet taking over an even larger proportion. And what I found interesting from the book was learning from Grabenbach how the internet is a place where people come across news not only because they look for news and information, but also almost accidentally when they're scrolling down their feeds on Twitter, social media, etc., etc. Even when you don't want, even if you don't have a social media account, if I click on my computer and look for the weather, next to it, there is a summary of news selected by Microsoft, but there is a summary of news. So Grabenbach in their chapter report on studies showing that even people who are not news consumers by default, but happen to come across news, tend to learn from it and remember stuff that they've come across almost accidentally in the news. So then the question became for me to try and understand whether, how, and to what extent can we learn from the news that we gather online. So the news, for example, news grazers, can they learn as much and as well as people who actually select or elect to watch news or read news online? So that was my key question. And how did I answer? I told you one of my assumptions is that I could draw on literature from basic psychological processes. And immediately what I thought about was adult learning. And within the literature of adult learning in educational psychology, there is a kind of current that looks at something called self-regulated learning. And I thought the perspective of self-regulated learning was particularly appealing to me because it had this almost in the, well, not almost, properly in the name, a focus on the subjectivity. Like the word self already tells you this is something that you do as a single individual, you know, within your subjective world. So I thought, how about I read about this perspective and I try to understand how do people learn from the news from that perspective. So I started looking at self-regulated learning, and what I found in the literature is that it seems to converge on certain characteristics of adult learning. Them being, for example, that learning is goal-oriented, learning is active, learning is motivated, it is emotion-laden and situated. So I thought, okay, how can I bring this literature together with the lessons I've learned from the book and come up with a model of learning from the news? That was my goal. And this is how I did. So I took goal-oriented. And we know from research in educational psychology that goals seem to be crucial in determining learning and achievement by students. So, for example, Zimmerman and Kisantes did a study in which they asked high school girls to either focus on the outcome of their learning or focus on the accuracy of their completion of a task. And what they found is that simply by asking different things, they got a better performance when people were focusing on the accuracy compared to the outcome. So don't worry about the mark, fundamentally. Worry about what you're doing, not about the mark. It will come after, which is what I tell my students all the time. And of course, there is Bokayert, who is, I don't know how to pronounce it. I should ask her really. But she's a big name in educational psychology, and she focused for a long time on explaining the role that goals as well as emotions play in the process of learning. And indeed, from our book, what we learned was that, well, Cantor and Apport already talk about tastes and habits. We have the uses and gratification perspectives that tell you, in my mind is similar to goals. I'm happy to be challenged on it. But for me, the reason why you are consuming the news, whether it's for entertainment purposes or it is for, while you're driving just to keep you company, or you actually have an event that you're particularly interested in learning, that will affect what and how you learn from the news. And of course, that's part of our understanding of basic media psychology, if you want. Like everybody in media psychology would agree pretty much on that. And of course, we also have research by Schroeder, showing how, whereas it's true that, and I think this study was with the US public, if I'm not wrong, but I'll double check. The vast majority of people now see news as a form of entertainment. So they're not there to actually, oh, let's see what I can learn today about what is going on in the world. They're like, okay, let's get a bit of distraction or, just a pastime and watch the news. However, he managed to demonstrate how even those who don't value news as a form of gathering information, etc., they still know very well what high quality journalism look like, and they are very demanding of high quality journalism. And what I loved was the evidence that people are able to switch and to kind of, when it's important for them, to learn from the news. For example, when there is an election, when they are called to play their role as citizens, they will use the news in a different way, and they will learn from the news in a different way. So this was the G in games. Active is the second thing that is common in most self-regulated learning perspectives. Now, we know already from social learning theory by Bandura how, people are active in transforming and restructuring the information that they acquire from the outside world to create a representation in their minds that they will then use to recall and, act in society and work upon. So we know that the information in itself is not taken and brought in our brain as it is. We transform it. We're active in the process of learning. And of course, when it comes to the self-regulated learning perspective, you have the additional active aspect of adult learning trying to achieve a particular goal and structuring and directing and selecting the information in a way that will serve that particular goal. Of course, in the psychology of journalism, I think there are several examples, throughout the book of active learning, but I thought the most compelling example is the chapter by Jo Meredith, in which she talks about discourse and how, from a discursive psychology perspective, discourse is in itself action. Like, you don't need anything else. If you speak something, you speak for a particular goal, and you are acting. The spoken word is action in itself. So in a way, you can say that news making, news discussing are in themselves active processes that are involved in the process of learning from the news. We also can find in almost all self-regulated learning models that I've come across the element of motivation. So motivation, which I think is slightly different from goals, because you can have different motivations that serve one goal, or one goal that serves many motivations. So to me, in my mind, they are separate constructs, but they're still affective in their nature. And of course, we know the motivated cognition literature would suggest that our motivations will affect not only the processing of what is out there, the truth, but the selection, the attention that we pay to the world around us, the selection of the information we're going to put our cognitive effort in, the sense making, the way we interpret the reality. These are all factors that are part of the motivation, and that I think are quite relevant when we think about why different people read the same item of news and come up with completely different interpretations of what they just read. So of course, linking back to the psychology of journalism, we know that there are several sources of motivation that arise from very basic concepts or ideas in psychology, processes in psychology. So when it comes to journalism, think of the way they conceive their professional duties, their norms and role conceptions. These will constitute motivators that will push them to act in a way as opposed to others. Same with the audience, their conception of their role as citizens, audience, whatever they are thinking themselves of in that moment will inform the way they approach the information. And of course, we have a chapter in which we analyze the role of social identity and how we are motivated to create, maintain, and protect a positive view of the groups we belong to. So that will, in a way, inform and motivate us to interpret news in a particular way, as opposed to the other. And I don't want to be too political, but think of climate change and how we interpret news concerning climate change. There will be quite a lot of group-based motivation pushing us in interpreting, the risks in a way or the other, the data in a way or the other, etc., etc. And obviously, ideology, cultural values, all are kind of pushing us to see things in a particular way. And I think news content is no different from anything else that we're considering. We say also that the process of learning is a highly emotional process. And I love this quote that says, emotions are not just the fuel that powers the psychological mechanism of a reasoning creature. They are parts, highly complex and messy part of this creature's reasoning itself. And that, for me, explains why emotions, on the one hand, are so important, on the other hand, haven't been studied for a long time because they're messy. And like media, pure science shies away from messy and complex constructs because it's very difficult to reduce them and to measure them accurately. So obviously, emotions in the process of learning, for example, are the result of an interaction between the student and the environment. Now, think about the implication of this with online news consumption. For example, when you come across a particular item on your social media feed, and the environment, which means the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of comments, the different types, where you are, how you're feeling at the moment, etc., etc. All these factors will, in a way, impact the learning itself, what you get out of the article. And there is, in the book, some evidence that shows that the emotional content, on the one hand, attracts attention and makes sure that people will pay more attention to whatever news is presented in a more emotion rich way. For example, tabloids tend to attract a lot of attention, tabloidization of news. But they also have an effect on the way we are able to process the information. So there is a balancing act there that is necessary and needs to be recognized in charging further emotions in the content in order not to make it dull, to make it more attractive, etc., etc. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, risking that the core message that you're trying to convey will be lost because you are overloading somehow the person. And of course, we have a full chapter dedicated to emotion in the book, and which fundamentally says that reporting is nowadays increasingly emotion laden, to the point that not only are articles covered in terms of positive, negative, which is the classic approach. Yes, something terrible is happening or something wonderful is happening, but there are references, and Bachelet and Soroka managed to track specific emotions being expressed in the text of news. The final part is the argument that says that learning, in that case, learning is situated. So Bocquart says learning has been achieved when the students have retrieved or used information sometime after it has been read, heard, and discussed. And I think that's important because it speaks to the strategies that we use to measure learning or knowledge. And in the chapter, I have a section in which I actually discuss how have we measured knowledge so far. And my argument is that what we have measured is the ability to recall, is not learning. And that is problematic for me, because if I really am interested in understanding the role news play in democracy, I cannot simply stop at ability to recall. There is a lot more that needs to be taken in account. So in the psychology of journalism, obviously, when we're talking about news being situated, we also mean that it's bound, the learning, within the affordances of the medium, the media system, and the cultural and professional norms where this occurs. So to summarize what I said so far, and I hope I didn't talk too much, this is a model. This is a drawing that puts together all the various bits that I've been talking about. where at the heart, as you can see, is the construction of content. It's not content. And that is one of my challenges. I don't know how to measure it. I mean, I'm thinking, asking people, tell me what you think, but then there must be a better way. I don't know what it is. And goals, motivation, and emotion predict the way in which we construct and interpret content. The construction of content feeds back in emotion as well, and in turn affects motivation, goals as well. There is obviously the construction of content is also affected by our pre-existing knowledge and skills, medium affordances, and the trio, I call it the sociological trio, which is beliefs about media outlet, journalism, what we think the role of media are in our society, the media system, and cultural context. And the outcome of all this would be the acquisition of knowledge and skills, which then feeds back. And I think that's it. I'll go back to the model. I think it's a lot more interesting. Okay, I'm done. Do you have any question? How does it work? Do I hand back to you? I don't know how to do that.
I don't know. Brian, how do we?
Yeah, I would say maybe let's stop the screen sharing and we'll go back to gallery mode and open it up for discussion.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Coen, I just want to say that first thing first, I love that path analysis at the beginning, looking at public versus private news. I think that's, for us in the United States, particularly salient because we don't have strong public news options.
Know.
Everything is basically privatized. So I love it. That's something that I will definitely look into and use. And then the other thing, I think you kind of alluded to it, where you had your, the three core constructs or whatever. One of them being, you need to have informed voters to make a functioning democracy. But then you alluded to it later, and I like this idea of, instead of informed voters, being able to go in and pass a test on current events or something. It's more about, when you receive a piece of information, how are you able to critique it? How are you able to analyze it, apply it to the other constructs and knowledge that you have? That's a little bit of a different skill set. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciated that nuanced thought, and I'm excited to see where you go with that. It's not really a question or a point, but I was glad that you got there with that.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's really nice to hear that. And I do think, if you are interested in that, I think Stephen Coen recently published yet another study which supports our results. And once again, it shows the strength of public broadcast system as compared to private system. He's Cardiff University, and you should definitely, he's on Twitter, he's in private mode. I don't know if you can find him, but if you can, by all means, do follow him. He does some amazing work in the area. Comes to mind for me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, Sharon, thank you so much for this. And, I really love this emphasis on looking at journalism, the process, how it works, because so much of our attention now is on the exception, which is dominant, like conspiracy, right? And so I am guilty because I'm teaching a class on conspiracy and social media. And I think that this framework at the beginning would have really to have as a normative, right, of how we co-construct meaning would have been, because social media are not just isolated, right? But there's only so much you could cover in a class. So I actually think that we need to write more about this, the normative, rather than the exception. The other thing I wanted to ask you is you have an article on trust, and that you wrote that looked at, I believe, social media reactions, no, not social media, newspaper comments, right, to an article, and how the
one on
construction.
expertise.
Yes, expertise, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of like who is an expert, which also kind of touches upon trusting someone to be an expert. And I noticed that in your variables, it was not there. And I wonder how you have you thought of that previous article of yours? And then my last one is that this article, this last slide has all these different variables. But I can imagine that from a broader perspective, the individual elements, the weights, if you want to translate it to that, might be different depending on the times. And so have you considered taking a social representations approach to how those individual variables, they're there, but in a way, how are they, weighted in my representation of the world? So those are just, three things. Again, the normative aspect, I thank you for that. Expertise, bordering on trust, and then the social representations part.
Thank you, Regina. I love you. Great minds think alike, that for sure. So when it comes to, I actually had a slide that I wrote only for you. I will show you privately. I will email you the whole presentation because I have a second model. That is the how can you say, the model from the user viewpoint, where obviously there will be different levels, but I have one that is all made with circles of influence and overlapping circle, and I was thinking of social representation in that. So I'll send you that. Okay. Yes, I've thought about social representation as a viewpoint to analyze all these. Yes. And not only have a thought, but please do it. It would be brilliant. Second, when it comes to trust, I wrote beliefs about media outlet and journalism in the model, but that's what I was thinking about, I think, really. Like, I was thinking the way in which we construct content will be dependent on what we believe. So beliefs is a gentle way to say, if we think they're not trying to trick us, if we trust them, we will take one, and that's Howe's model, isn't it? Whether you approach something with an oppositional kind of perspective or etc. So in a way, I do think trust plays a role, which, in the sense of beliefs about media outlet and journalism. Now, I have to be honest, I was thinking more about news on climate change and stuff like that, where very few have the experience or the means to actually know. I don't know anything about the science of climate. You know what I mean? I've been publishing on climate change for 13 years on that topic. However, I did buy a book. And after the 5th page, I was like, oh, God save me. It's another PhD to learn that. And so it's based on trust. You need to trust that people covering that are doing their work properly. We need to, Andreas was saying before, you need also to have the critical awareness, the ability to not only take on information, but also evaluate it. And I think trust plays a big role there. We know from the literature on motivated cognition that we tend to be a lot more trusting of people who tell us what we want to hear, compared to people who tell us things that might kind of shake our world a little bit.
Right, and that's related to expertise, right?
It is.
Because if you trust, you'll trust the experts. I mean, you know very well, we've got a lot of epidemiologists running around who have never studied epidemiology and just look up videos, and that's their understanding of research. So, all right, thanks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I find that area particularly interesting. And I don't know if it came across in the paper as well as I wanted. But what I was trying to do in that paper was not to minimize or disrespect people, although sometimes it does feel that they should be disrespected, because, you know, you disrespect me. But what I was trying to say is that one of the motivators, one of the things that might push people to behave in that way, to not listen, shut down. Oh, my mama herself, when I went to Italy, did I tell you? When I went home, I had a discussion with my mother, and it's my mother, you know, and we had this discussion. And she told me, you know, you sound like someone who wants to know a lot, you know, I don't know how, pretentious when you say these things, because, you know, you are quoting and using terms, which is true. I don't have the dictionary to explain things too simply in Italian, especially. But the issue, what I learned from there, is that these people feel silenced. They feel like I'm implicitly, by using a particular language, by presenting facts and studies and numbers and percentages, etc., I'm silencing them. I'm discarding their knowledge and experience to make place to the truth that I believe in and that I'm the bearer of. And in a way, I think if we had a different model of media provision in which these sources of knowledge were recognized, acknowledged, and valued, people wouldn't need to come and step on my field, where what I know is what I know and you know nothing about it. So, you know, my word goes because I'm the one who knows. But if you don't have a field, the only playing field available is my playing field. So my argument is that the best way would be to have a larger field dedicated to more types of knowledge, to acknowledge the value of every type of knowledge and every experience. In that way, people wouldn't feel like they have to come and play on my patch. They can play on theirs.
Right.
That's how I think.
Sharon, I just wanted to draw attention to Vicky. She has a question she put in the comment. And Vicky?
Yeah, I started reading it.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. I like the interdisciplinary nature of your thinking and putting the model together. And what came to me, well, the communication studies, the psychology, I was wondering if the lens that we see the news, multicultural in today's global world, would be another variable in the model.
Absolutely. We could add it. Do you think it? Yeah, another variable in the model, or is it about multiculturality maybe in the box where I say culture? Do you see multiculturality as someone who is multicultural, the subjective world
Yes.
of someone who is multicultural, understands multiple cultures? Is it qualitatively different? Because it's relative, isn't it? You're able to step in and out of a particular vision.
I was thinking in terms of multicultural, in terms of if we take a particular narrative or a story and we were to compare the British newspapers, let's say, for example, versus American, or if we had access to the Russian papers now on a political story, and all of the respected journalists, that each one could be showing different structure and therefore affecting our interpretation. So to really understand something, we have to draw from multiple media structures globally. That's what I'm...
Okay, so basically, if I understand it correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, what would happen in that instance is that model will be multi-layered, right? So there will be a similar model, the same model repeated for every news source and every news item, and every, I'm visualizing it on different level and across different countries, like a multi-level model working within different outlets. Each outlet has its own culture. So within a country, there would be there is multiculturality, because if you watch CNN, it's different from watching NBC or whatever someone watches. And then you can postulate that the ability to draw from many different kind of units of models, put it that way, will be a skill that will determine how and what you take, how you construct and what you take from each news. Is that?
Yes, I think that's getting there, where I think it was Dr. Jason Oler was talking about we live in this new world of media literacy, where we can't just look at a story in the LA Times or the New York Post or whatever you read, but it has to be seen, because we have global reach in data and construction, that these different, and this is like from advertising too, like headlines of a story, the structure of a story, the headline, how that might be examined in, let's take media from 10 different countries, and then even our own identity, if that's in the cultural box. Some of us might be multinational, multi-ethnic. There's no easy box to put us in. And that also makes it very interesting.
And it gets even more complicated if you think about intersectionality and how, it's not simply a matter of overlapping boxes. It's a matter that the set of boxes you belong to means that your experience is unique and very different from the set of boxes, from the experience of someone who shares some group memberships, but not all, with yours. So I completely agree. Yes, I think it is a multi-layered. Now, the literacy element, which is the ability to kind of draw and interpret from different news, I thought could be kind of encapsulated by the idea of pre-existing knowledge and skills. But maybe there is room to be more specific in that sense, and say, the ability to process intercultural content is particularly important.
Yes, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Allora,
Sharon, I not only love your topic, but I love your enthusiasm for it. It's contagious. Um,
I
so
love it.
kind of on a different topic, I was wondering if how your book and your work in general has been received by journalists. How do
Well,
they
that's a
feel
good
about being
question,
under a
isn't it?
microscope? Yeah.
I have to be very honest with you. I will be, because I see no point being otherwise. Now, I spotted some things in the version that they printed in this book that mean it's not perfect. And I'm a perfectionist. So it bothers me immensely, which means I haven't been promoting very much the book. Hoping, that I can get a reprint where they amend the things. You see, these signs are kind of things that I've noticed that are not right. And I think, before I go and promote it, but my colleagues in journalism have read it, and they're my friends, right? So they loved it, of course. I gave it to James Karen, who's a person that I worked a lot with in the past. He was the person that involved me in all those international studies. And he gave a raving review. Now, I don't know if it's just because he's my friend or because it's true. Because according to him, it's a milestone. One thing I can tell you, I'm getting more and more requests from students of journalism that want to come and do a PhD with me.
Interesting.
So,
That's
it might be that, it's kind of getting them to think about themselves and their practice in a different way. But I promised my colleague that I will make an effort, even if it's imperfect. It's still my baby and deserves to be shown out. So shown off. So I will promote it more and try to get more feedback.
I wouldn't worry so much about the perfections. My prediction is that members of the profession will be flattered with the attention.
You think? Cool.
I could be wrong, but that's what I predict.
Well, I can say as a person with a degree in journalism, as a former reporter and anchor, I think it's fabulous. I wrote in the chat, I think it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I almost have the tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, and you're doing what are you, a PhD student, member of staff?
No, I'm a first year media psychology student.
You're gonna help us save the world. Thank you.
I could really see a sort of this model up, and then having students then joining in research, right? Because, it could be now people come in at whatever level they want, and, whatever place, and
oh
really,
my God, that would be my dream.
the social construction aspect of which validates perspectives, how people are constructing and why, right? It's messy to be able to say, well, take a look at these conspiracy theorists, and in what sense is this something that we need to look at, because they're constructing the world in a certain way. Hidden beneath, is there validity to something? Does it say something about our democracy? Does it say something about 21st century, democracy, markets, capitalism, that people are feeling alienated? But we're not doing that. It's tricky to do that, because then it's almost like you're siding in with the crazies, or I don't mean the crazy, but I mean that's the view, right? And then how do you do that? But I think this really does help reverse that kind of paradigm.
Thank you so much. By the way, I was reading this book on conspiracy theories by a philosophy professor, I think at Oxford or Cambridge or something. And the title of the book already is is believing in BS. I won't say it because I want to
Now we're
pretend that I'm
recording
polite.
this. You don't want to say it.
No, I'm not gonna say it, but it's believing in BS. And it's all about believing in things that are inaccurate, etc. And I found it very disparaging.
Well, there is a whole philosophy of BS, and there have been philosophical papers that have been written on the philosophy of BS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting because on the one hand, I understand where they're coming from. I mean, I don't dare thinking what it meant at the time during COVID, where people were going to work for the NHS or hospital health, risking their own lives and having someone telling them, oh, it's all fake, don't worry, you're not. Like, I can only imagine how terrible an experience it must have been for them to go through that and to be exposed to such conspiracy theories. I don't dare thinking. I think I would have ended up in jail if it was me and someone came to me with that. But at the same time, when I try, because I spent, now I'm bored to death, but I did spend a lot of time on social media talking to people, trying to understand them, etc., etc. Oh my God, the hours I was in lockdown and I live on my own, so I didn't have much better to do. So, and I do understand where they're coming from. I do understand that, it's almost as if you're like, I got no field to play on, so I'm coming to play on your field, and I'm claiming that you don't belong to that field. You're not good enough, and everyone who plays in that field, they don't know enough.
No,
About it,
it's a rabbit hole. And then, I don't know if there are any questions, but one last variable
there
that I
are
wanted to
lots.
ask you. So we know that you are, looking at subjectivity and sort of almost, from the phenomenological perspective of what people are thinking, right? But did you ever take into account implicit learning? Now, there are limits to implicit learning, but here's what I'm thinking. Even if I don't click, the fact that we have entertainment and they repeat and repeat and repeat, sometimes, I'll never forget, back in the 80s or 90s, there was this commercial and it was pork. It's the other white meat, right? And it was a time when the people who, were selling pork, whatever, the pork, it's the other white meat, trying to say, hey, it's healthy. And I remember some people, New York City, my building, and I talking to them and they would say, well, pork is healthy. It's the other white meat. There was no irony in it. I mean, they were repeating it, but this is because they were exposed to the commercials. So, I think that we cannot underestimate a kind of set. I don't think it's processed. I mean, if we look at cognition, we really would have to say that there are limits in terms of how it's processed, but behavioral theory. So from that perspective, if we just see it and see it and see it, so it becomes familiar and at least we can repeat it. Did you ever consider that variable, or might?
Well, in a way, is what Grab and Bass were saying about news grazers. Is like, stuff that almost implicitly goes, you digest
Right.
in that way. And I have to say, this learning from the news model is for people who choose the news. Is not for accidental consumption of news. I don't think it would work. And the reason why I don't think it would work is that you can tell me as much as you want the pork is the other white meat. I'll never eat it. Why? Because my motivation, my emotion, and my goals are not aligned with consumption of pork. So I think those factors will influence the way I interpret the message.
Right,
And-
correct, but it does influence the person who is repeating the, you know,
yeah,
the person has been, yeah.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
but it could be like I don't know, like in the mere exposure effect. The
Yeah, exactly. That's
literature
what I'm
in the
talking about.
mere
Remember.
exposure effect says that provided your initial impression is not negative, then repeated exposure will increase your liking of a persuasive message and will make it more likely that you will be persuaded, which is the principle underpinning the songs being played all the time, and they're meaningless songs that, you know, one doesn't hate and
Yes,
doesn't
like
like.
an earworm. Yes, yeah.
Brava. And you keep hearing them, you end up
Yes.
liking them or even singing them, not because of anything, but if you hate it to begin with, that ain't gonna happen. You know what I mean? Or it's highly unlikely to happen. That would be my argument.
Yeah.
From that viewpoint. Maybe we should organize a seminar where we play around with this model a bit more.
that would be great.
Uh-huh.
But we talk to Brian about that. We need to.
No, a seminar, not like an official colloquium
Right,
thing.
but something where, yeah, a kind of
something to have
cluster
fun.
weekend gathering that we do or something.
Well, it seems we have plenty to talk about, but I think it's probably about time to bring the meeting to a close. So thank you, Sharon, very, very much. It's been very interesting and just very well presented. Fascinating work.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry if I'm not very quick at reading, so I couldn't answer all the questions. If I could have a copy so that I can, and the email addresses of the people, I can email them, or they can email me and ask me whatever they want.
I'll print a copy of the chat and send it to you, so you have that, and we'll have contact information available
Also,
as well.
Brian, will this recording be available at all? So some students wanted to come and couldn't because of work.
Yeah, we have on our media psychology webpage, we have a playlist, and they include former media psych colloquia and other presentations. So,
Nice.
yep, they'll be take a couple days to get it up there, but we'll make it available, and Sharon will make sure you know about that also.
Sharon is working on one is the external to one of our students, and I know the student couldn't be here, so I'll let her know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you,
wonderful.
Sharon,
Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.